No, 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 no. No.
Morning, Gary.
Good morning. A bunch of stuff closed here, and Tom and Susan. I'm Midge and William. Pepper. We
Hey,
got
Julie.
Matt and Joe. Need to have four.
Julie, is that a live scene or is that a virtual background?
Joe, it's a picture of my backyard. It's about what it looks like right now, but it's
Cool.
it's virtual, but it's a picture.
That's great.
Thanks. John, is it better if we stop our video? Does that make it easier? 'Cause we all-
Not on my end. You're fine. When we get started, I'll get everybody to mute themselves.
Sure.
But we're good now. Last week, the reason we couldn't get the live stream to work was a Zoom issue. Not anything on our end, which we didn't realize. So we're already live streaming. I just started it a second ago. So
I've
we're-
been in some big Zoom meetings where they've advised us all to stop video other than the person speaking, just from a bandwidth issue. So if we end up having any problems, that might be something to suggest.
Okay, thank you. Huh, I'd not heard that before.
Yeah, and Sunday mornings is also a very popular time for Zoom, so.
Exactly.
Nobody saying anything.
Jane.
Good morning.
Joe and Glenette, it looks like you two guys must be on different planets.
Yeah, we're social distancing.
That's good. That's really good. Pitch, are you underwater?
No, I'm at the Atlanta Aquarium.
Oh, okay.
Well, it is 9:45. Sorry. And we're just going to wait. I know there are a few more people trying to get in. So we're just going to hold on for 1 or 2 more seconds as people continue to log in. I hope everybody had a good week and stayed dry. We had a lot of rain this week, and now it's going to be about 100 degrees this afternoon, I think. Morning, Robert.
Good morning.
John, it's hotter over here in India than where you are,
I would imagine.
but it's 7 o'clock in the evening too.
He's in India.
Well, stay safe.
I'm not really over there.
Oh,
Oh. And I thought Pidge was with Captain Nemo, and Marjorie must be up at the International Space Station.
where is that?
There.
She's, oh,
In the background.
it's cool. Is that the Earth or the,
Yeah, we
And
don't
I'm
know.
just sitting in my office.
you could put us one
Yeah.
on.
All right, so again, welcome back. I'm glad you're here again as we continue our discussion on racism in America today. Our video presenter this week is Jim Wallace, who is probably not, is probably well known to many of you. Wallace is the president and founder of the Sojourners community in Washington, D.C. Sojourners is a nonprofit, faith-based organization, network, and movement whose mission statement calls for putting faith into action for social justice. He is a best-selling author, public theologian, national preacher, social activist, international commentator on ethics and public life. He served on a White House advisory council on faith-based and neighborhood partnership, and as the chair of the Global Agenda Council on Values of the World Economic Forum. And as I said last week, I'm going to invite you to go ahead and mute yourselves as we prepare to watch the video. And we'll watch the video. It's about only 13 minutes this week. And then we'll open it up for just your reactions from the video. And then I have some discussion questions. I would just ask you to keep an open mind as you hear the video and as we dialogue and learn from each other. So if you want to go ahead and everybody mute themselves at this point. And I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Maybe I'm going to share my screen. Hold on 1 second.
I'm glad it's not just me that this happens to.
All right, can you all?
What I'm trying to say about America's original sin is that it's too easy for white folks to think of that as just slavery. People want to say that's over, my people didn't have slaves, they came later. No, it was the particular kind of slavery that we created, the Christians actually did, because you couldn't do to indigenous people.
Wait, this isn't your book? Because I didn't learn about it in church.
What's that?
I didn't learn about any of this in church, but I can...
No, you didn't learn about this in church,
Okay.
no.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
We couldn't do what we were doing to indigenous people, to their land, and stealing land and lives, and then to kidnap Africans to make them chattel property to create the biggest economic resource at this nation's founding called free labor. You couldn't do that to those made in the image of God. What Genesis 1 says. God said, let us make them in our image. So Imago Dei, image of God, had to be thrown away. So we had to make these people less than human. We had to say they were. So racial difference and white supremacy, that's the heart of our original sin. And that sin has destroyed people's lives, but also those who commit the sin. Because white supremacy, whiteness, the assumption of whiteness, the normality of whiteness, is a myth. It's an ideology. It's an idol. So the idea of white churches, white Christianity, is an idol, and idols separate us from God. So I would say the sin of white supremacy has separated the idol of white supremacy has separated white Christians from God. So this isn't just about helping people who have suffered from racism. It's about ourselves, about saving our own souls. It's about restoring our faith again and putting the idols aside. So this battle about racism is right at the heart of how the country is changing, because we're about to become a country that is no longer a white majority nation. That's a huge change. And so I think we're talking about becoming a global multiracial church, and here in the U.S., and then have that. So talking about being a new community, what King called the beloved community, and how that global multiracial body of Christ can also then change our societies, our nation. So it's like, remember who we are as Christians, our baptism, that we're not Jew or Gentile, bond or free, male or female. It's not race, class, or gender. We're one in Christ. And then that body of people can begin to change a society, a racialized policing system, criminal justice system, economics, education, even climate change. How do we change these things? By understanding that we are one people, and that our diversity is really the greatest blessing and strength of this nation. It's not a threat. But when they say old donkeys or dying donkeys kick the hardest, so the donkey, the old dying donkey of white supremacy, is kicking really hard right now. Afraid of a shift, afraid of a change, and that's what our politics are all about. It's underneath everything. So a new generation is ready to make that change, is making that change. And my two boys are in schools and sports teams that are completely multicultural. And for them, it's their experience, their expectation, and for them, it's obvious life is better when there's all of us. I mean, we have more resource, we have more energy, we have more perspective, we have more talent, we have more gifts, we have more possibilities. And the fearful creating bubbles between us, it just doesn't work. And so I remember,
It doesn't work.
well, for example, here's a story. So my son in the 5th grade was studying immigration. So they bring in dads or moms who are involved in the issue the kids are studying. They brought me in to talk about immigration. So I talked about how we have 11 million undocumented immigrants and how they don't get medical care that they need or police protection. Families are being broken up because of all the 1,000 deportations every day. And these kids were astonished. They were incredulous. Why don't we fix that? Why doesn't the Congress fix that? Have you talked to them? I said, yeah, I've talked to them. What do they say? And I said, well, they say their constituencies are afraid. And the kid said, afraid of what? And then it hit me. I looked at this public school in DC, 5th grade class, and there they were, African American, Latino, Asian American, Native American, white, Somali, Maltese, everything. I said, they're afraid of you. And the kid said, afraid of us? Why are they afraid of us? Well, they're afraid you look like the new America. You look like the future, what we're becoming. You look like that. Why are they afraid of that? Because they don't think it works. They don't think it's going to work. Tell me, is it working? The kid said, yeah, it's working great. It's really cool. So if the kids understand that, how do the churches say, yeah, this is really cool, you know, and this is the way it's supposed to be? And so, the fear is always the fear of the other whom we don't know. And that's why proximity, there's nothing like proximity to change your mind about who somebody is and their community or their family or whatever. So I think this kind of moment is full of opportunity because we're about to enter into a new place. But it's going to take some real navigating of the waters, some real building of that new bridge to a new America.
I thought like making words flesh was just a metaphor. And what does all this like stuff have to do with salvation anyway?
With what?
With salvation anyway?
Well, if we go back to the beginning and the early church, for them it was central to bring everybody in. And that Galatians text that I quoted in there's no Jew or Gentile, bond or free, male or female, that was a baptismal text, a baptismal formula in the early church. I mean, when they had a baptism and they did new converts and brought them in, they'd read that text every time. They're saying, these are the big divisions between us, race, class, gender, that divide human beings. And we're about taking those walls down. We're about overcoming those divisions. We're about eliminating those and finding that we are one people. That's what we do here. And if you don't want to do that, you should go somewhere else.
But you miss out on the good food and the good music.
You miss out on all the kind of rich blessing of diversity. And having lived in diverse situations most of my life, it's like one of my kids, I'm a Little League baseball coach, and one of my kids the other day came up and said, you know what, Coach, I went to my family cousin's house and he took me to school with him. His school was really weird, really weird. I said, why you think was it weird? He says, it's like all white people. It's just really weird. It's like, so we're getting to a place now that I think a lot of people see just that our human flourishing is so much deeper and better when we have the blessing of all that diversity. And so how to see that as a blessing and a gift and not a threat is at the heart of our political debate in this country right now. So we're moving into a whole new place, a whole new period in the life of this country and the world. And I think people of faith have got to help lead by example and help lead the way and show that this really does work, that this is better for us and this is good for us. And it's always good Jesus says, you'll know the truth and the truth will make you free. So when we're living on lies, the lies of race is a social construct. It isn't even real. We created this to justify slavery. And it isn't real. It's a myth. So we're living out this lie and we're stuck in it. And so we're not free. So it isn't just people who are oppressed racially who aren't free. It's the people who are part of that system who are white and don't even see what's going on. We're not free either. So at both ends, someone said in the panel, at both ends of the chain, there needs to be freedom. And so I think, that's the power of this. We can all get set free and find a whole new way to live together, which is very, very, very powerful. The book of Romans in the New Testament, chapter 12, says, don't be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now, so when white Christians are more white than Christian, they're being conformed to the world. So if white Christians were more Christian than white and acted that way, black parents would have less to fear for their children, right? This is very practical stuff here. So how do we really, and it says be transformed by the renewal of your mind, which is, it says, your acceptable worship. This is a worship issue. So when we are culturally predictable, when we act the way we do because we're white or middle class or American instead of Christian followers of Jesus, we've kind of missed the whole point of faith. Our faith is meant to be more important than our culture to us, okay? So we are who we are from our culture, but it's our faith that brings us together. So how do we, and that makes the church kind of countercultural, because we're living in a whole different way. And I think that's very exciting. It's very freeing. I see a new generation wanting that. I see people doing that. So my hope is always when people take their faith and put it into action. That's always the hope that I see. When you put your faith into action, it makes you no longer sociologically predictable. That somehow you're being spiritually transformed. That changes your behavior, your mindset, your way of thinking, your relationships, and changes how you are a citizen, how you participate in the society. You know, in this America's Original Sin book, I do the biblical narrative on the issue of race. It begins in Genesis with, then God says, I'll make them all in my image, so they can together have dominion, better word, their stewardship over the rest of the creation. But when one people wants dominion over another people, that upsets God's plan. That's a violation of what Genesis 1 calls for. And then it goes through all the scriptures in Galatians, the body of Christ, and then in Revelation 7, it's a wonderful picture. It says, then all the peoples, countless peoples from different tribes, nations, languages are together worshiping God. At the end, we're together in our own tribes, languages, and nations, in our ethnicities. There's no like post-racial society. There's no heavenly race where we're all the same. No, in our differences, in our diversity, but all worshiping God. That's how it ends. All created in God's image, and at the end, worshiping God together in all of our tribes, nations, languages, and all of our diversity, worshiping God together at the end.
So Wallace writes, idols separate us from God. Wallace suggests that whiteness as an ideal is idolatry. Society worships whiteness. Take some time to contemplate what hearing this brings up to you and express how you feel or what questions that brings up for you.
Well, I'd never thought of idolatry being, or excuse me, white supremacy being an idolatrous type action. I'd never thought about it that way, but it certainly is an interesting concept, and I can see how it separates us from God.
Thank you, Gary.
John, I think it isn't so much, I think what he's saying is that we idolize being white. That being white is a level above all the other colors of skin that people have in the world, and that we worship that. I'm not saying that the people on this Zoom call worship that, but I think that whites generally, and maybe I could say white Americans, but maybe whites globally, take comfort in thinking that we are better than everyone else, and that's a form of idolatry.
Others?
John, this is Bob Osborne.
Bob?
I admit to being raised in a society that, even though we never talked about it, we gradually have an assumption, or we've just understood that was what we were seeing, even if we never fully, as I say, said that was the case. I think today there were some article or two in the Observer that I would say deals with the issue of idols that I hadn't thought about, and this had to do with the statues coming down. And I did not know this, but if this reporting is accurate, what it was saying is that most of these Confederate statues went up in the early 1900s, 35 years after the war was over. And they also then came at the same time as the Jim Crow laws. So these idols of statues were really put up to help to illustrate white supremacy. And then this article said that there was a convention or a meeting in Charlotte in 1929 where the governor came and said, "We have won." And he very specifically said that the white Anglo-Saxon race had won after all these years. So again, idols in the form of statues, I think are real. And with that broader understanding of when they came in, that they weren't built, immediately after the war to honor soldiers so much as they were really put in to honor white supremacy.
I've heard similar too. I'm going to remind you that we do have the chat feature too. So if anybody has anything they feel they want to type, encourage you to do that too. Other comments?
This is Robert. Something that Jim Wallace said struck me when he was talking about the way that people of faith justified their treatment of people of color by basically perceiving them as less than human in order to not have to deal with the whole Imago Dei, image of God, belief that we were all created in the image of God. Well, if this person is not fully human, then I don't have to wrestle with that, is what he said. And I think about, all the talk that has been a part of recent years, as a parent and my children coming through school, and all the conversations about bullies and what bullies do to demean and push down other people because of their own, just to make themselves feel better. And I think about, how sad that is to think that we have to push or that as a society we've pushed other people down and demeaned them, making them feel less than human for our own benefit. It's kind of sickening, but I'm glad that these conversations are happening so that that can be seen and addressed.
Thought it was significant that he said dying donkeys kick the hardest. And I think that's what we see going on right now. We see a lot of the white supremacists kicking hard, and I'm hoping they're dying.
There's a lot of fear there, don't you think? That's part of what's going on, change and fear. I was struck by him quoting Romans and talking about how we don't need to be conformed to the world, but be transformed. And then I thought, well, our faith, we do not make that more important than our culture. In fact, we sometimes criticize people that we think make their faith more important than the culture they live around. I'm thinking about the Muslim community. So it's a very fine line that we walk there, where we need to be truly Christian and truly care about our fellow human beings, no matter what their race or what their religion, because we do tend to criticize both in our act of being supreme or feeling like we're above others. So what do you think of that?
Reactions?
I would say that passage in Romans is also followed by the verses of, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought to think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a key part of it. And then it says, be transformed by the renewing of your minds. You know, God is going to give us the grace to see ourselves and our fellow human beings as he sees us, or as God sees us, rather than as we tend to see ourselves. We're better than they are.
Yes.
Yes, Cheryl Holland.
Hey, Cheryl.
John, I was a little disappointed that he only spoke about whiteness or primarily as an individual matter. And of course, that's very basic, that we individually need to be transformed by the renewal of our minds. That's absolutely crucial, particularly in regard to this idol of whiteness. But whiteness not only works within us, it works outside of us too, as the Bible talks about powers and principalities. Whiteness is an aggressive power that works to keep us apart, that defies this notion that we are one in Christ, and keeps us away from considering diversity as a blessing. If we doubt that, look at our own church. Now, I think we individually find that situation of our own church, and I think churches in general, as an abomination. But yet, those structures and systems are very much active and alive. And we have to find a way to attack them, as well as the whiteness, the idea that we are superior within us. Certainly that needs to be addressed, but also whiteness as a system and a structure that is an aggressive and I would say evil power that operates in our society, that keeps the status quo the way it is. And as we emerge into this new era after COVID, hopefully, that's going to be a power outside of us as well as within us that we have to contend with.
Thank you, Cheryl. Any reactions to what Cheryl said? I can't see everybody, so
I'll say well said, and it's an uncomfortable truth.
thank you, Brad. Wallace says that the
Wants to say something.
who does?
Idge, were you raising your hand?
Oh, go ahead. I can't see, so you're just gonna have to. I have it on speaker view, so I can't see people. So you're just gonna have to unmute yourself and go.
I enjoyed his commentary of going to the 5th grade class, and Washington, D.C. probably has the opportunity for a wide variety of children. Our youngest grandchildren in Charlotte went through the magnet schools from 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, the 3 of them. And in the 1st grade, our youngest granddaughter was the only white girl in the class. And she was fine with that. Her best friend was Harvey Gantt's granddaughter. So there were plenty of people that she could be friends with. Now they're all up in high school, and these youth are our future in solving this. I asked our granddaughter if she had gone to any of the marches in Charlotte, and she said she had not, but a friend who's a Black boy did, and he told her everyone was kind and friendly, and it was a very good experience. We tend to hear the negative things, but I think there are good things slowly starting, and it's the young people.
Thank you, Pidge. So Wallace says the church of the future will continue to be larger than borders. It continues to move towards God's ultimate dream of united humankind. This means people who have had animosity for generations will be worshiping side by side. Can you imagine it? Younger generations are already living it. Do you feel any resistance to the church of the day being deconstructed or being rebuilt anew upon its cornerstones of Jesus's imprint of grace and love? What do you think?
John, I'd like to mention, go ahead.
This is Julie, just a quick comment. I think it's easy to say that we like what you just said in terms of rebuilding the church, but as you know, when we look at worship service and things like that, everybody's fine with it as long as you don't touch my service, my choir, my preferred way of doing things. So I think we have to challenge ourselves in terms of we do need to continually be reforming ourselves. The hard part is in the details and how we do that. And I do think we'll have some resistance that we'll have to work on.
I was intrigued by his very last statement about the vision from the book of Revelation, where all the tribes were still tribes. And I think that's the line we're trying to negotiate in part about the issue of worship styles, about the issue of cultural heritages being blended and respected. And that's a tricky line sometimes. I mean, I've always been hesitant in terms of thinking about how we approach Davidson Presbyterian to make sure we're doing it in a very respectful way, rather than saying, oh, look, we've got more members, you ought to come worship with us. They are who they are, and we've got to respect that and somehow honor that at the same time that we don't get stuck too much in our own way of doing things. We don't, well, we've always done it that way. Notion. I think that's a tricky line.
Even in our own church, if you think about our music, I love both the 9:45 service and the 11 o'clock because of the diversity of music, if nothing else. I really love, the formal and the contemporary. And yet, we should also love, the different style of the Black church. And I do, quite frankly. I don't like it when they go 3 hours, I'll admit, but I do enjoy their music. So there has to be some compromise if we all are going to get together. And yet, I think that we should all, realize that maybe we all like to go to specific services, for the reason of what we prefer and the way we worship. And there's nothing wrong with that, I don't believe. But I think it is wrong when we send our kids to specific tribal schools and we don't give them the opportunity to get together and intermix. And so I think, the schools are still a big problem as far as I'm concerned personally.
And I also feel like while we may need to try to make our church more diverse and more welcoming to a variety of people, we also need to really respect that for many Black people, they need their Black church and they need that opportunity to grow and develop leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's been such an important part that we need to
Public
respect
speaking,
that,
leadership. Yeah.
that will need to continue for, I don't know how long, but maybe a long time while we try to figure all this out.
Lisa, you've said that's exactly the kind of thought I was thinking. This is Joe. I think at this time, rather than figuring out how we bring us together and worship together at this particular moment in time, I think more the calling to us white Christians is to speak out on behalf of our fellow people of color, to not sit quietly while they suffer and just continue to focus on our own salvation, as that one guy in the audience said, but to speak out and to do things like we're doing now through our social justice committee, or to join marches, to tell the world that Davidson TCPC cares about what's happening to these people, because they're people too, they're Christians, they're children of God. I think that's what should be our immediate priority.
John? I agree with Joe in terms of particularly what the speaker said in the video, to be more Christian than white, to think more Christian than color is so important. And also to those that have said that a lot of the challenge is the change. And whether it's the length of the service, the style of the service, anything, but just commenting on the various things that are going on in this discussion, that the youth is it. If you saw any of the protests throughout the last several weeks, it's young people for the most part, and diversity out the ears, which is wonderful to see.
Thank
John?
you. Susan, go ahead.
Yes, this is Susan Horning. In 1994, Carl and I were living in Columbia, South Carolina. We were members of Eastminster Presbyterian Church, and the invitation was given by the Columbia Presbytery, I don't know the name of it, to start a new church. And they took about 6 families from our church and about 6 families from an African-American Presbyterian church. Some of those had to be elders so that they would start with a session. And we were one of the families that did that. It was a wonderful experience. We moved from Columbia in 1997, and I've been looking for that church ever since. It doesn't exist. But does anyone know, has the Charlotte Presbytery ever considered starting from the ground up with a brand new church? I don't see how we're going to change. It'll be very gradual. It probably won't be in my lifetime that we're going to change the church as it is now. But have we considered starting from the ground up?
I have not been here long enough to know that. Robert, do you know?
I know of a couple of examples, aren't exactly like what you're talking about, Susan, but there have been a couple of new church developments. And as you know, one of the movements in the PCUSA is, or maybe you don't know, but there's something called new worshiping communities, which aren't necessarily chartered new churches, but they begin as creative ideas that eventually evolve into churches that are established within a presbytery. But there is a church in Charlotte that intentionally began about 3 or 4 years ago as a multicultural experiment. I don't know what the current makeup is in terms of diversity. And I'm racking my brain to remember the name of it.
Is that Caldwell?
No. Caldwell actually does work pretty hard at it as well, but I think I don't know the details of John Cleghorn's vision for that.
Demand the tools. We are a team of.
What is that? That was weird. The other thing I know of that has happened is when a couple of smaller churches have been dwindling, there have been efforts to have churches merge, and those have happened at least on one occasion across ethnic lines or racial lines, if you want to call them that, where you've got a predominantly Black and a predominantly white church that are dwindling in size, merging to share resources. And I don't know the success rate of that, but those kinds of things have happened on a limited basis. I was going to share real quickly. I went to a continuing ed event years ago at Columbia Seminary where the pastor from a church, and ironically, I feel like it might have been in Minneapolis. Maybe some of you have heard of the Church of All Nations. But I can't remember the pastor's name, but it is Presbyterian, and they began with a vision of being not just 50-50 white, Black, but completely multicultural. And their vision from the very beginning was that their leadership, both pastorally and on the session, would be diverse, and that all of their decision making would involve diverse opinions. And he talked about how it was a beautiful experiment, but it required incredible intentionality and a great deal of work. I've wondered for a while how a predominantly white congregation like DCPC could transform or evolve into something like that and what it would take. It's hard to think about doing that in a way that's authentic and not somehow contrived or forced.
I've been reading, this is Mary Kim, I've been reading Jennifer Harvey's How to Raise White Kids or White Children book. Has anyone started that? Anyway, Robert, I've been thinking the same thing, and the authenticity part would certainly be a concern, but are there any models of white churches around who have built into their Christian education, race conscious education for their children in the church? I mean, I think as a church, DCPC could write into their mission statement, you know, racial justice, and have programs that are dedicated to that. I know we're pretty much an all-white church, so that, but yet Jennifer Harvey would argue that all the more reason to bring this language about how to talk about race and how to not maintain white silence on the issue. It's going to become more and more the elephant in the room for us, I think, even though we don't have Black members so much. But for our children, you know, her point is it starts at such an early age, or even something dedicated to help white parents navigate this with their kids. You know, that might be a start.
This is Audrey. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, excellent. I'd offer another model as well. When I lived in Winston-Salem, I participated in, and I don't know if it's still going on, but it was an interracial dialogue group. It was a wonderful model that maybe we could look at. We had 6 churches. It was 3 African-American churches and 3 white churches. Actually, it wasn't just Presbyterian. We had a Lutheran church and a Moravian church as well. But we did events throughout the year together. And so we had pastoral exchanges where they would go back and forth. But one of the biggest things that we did, in addition to just some other social events during the year, ice cream socials and that, was that we connected our youth groups. So the youth groups continued to meet individually, but they also did events through the year, and our mission work in the summer was always combined with all the churches. And we were on a cycle of a 3-year cycle. So it was an international, national, and local mission trip. So one year we built a playground at one of the Black churches in downtown Winston-Salem, and we stayed at Winston-Salem State University that year. And it was wonderful because it brought the youth together in a connected way, and the adults on a regular basis. It was just a really neat model. I enjoyed it very much. Like I said, that was close to 20 years ago, and I'm not certain it's still going on. There was quite a good article back in 2012, I think, in the Winston-Salem Journal about it. But I just offer that as a model.
Thank you.
There was a church in Charlotte that Charlie and Marcia Summers went to. Jane Kane would probably remember the name of that church. That was deliberately multiracial, and the congregation.
Siegel Avenue. Siegel Avenue.
Right. And I don't know if that is still going on, but that was a good example of a multiracial church pretty close to downtown Charlotte, that was Presbyterian, that had a white and Black congregation and white and Black leadership.
I believe that that members of Myers Park Pres went over and helped combine those. I had a good friend back in the 80s, long time ago, who D.G. Martin, who some of you know. D.G. was one of the original members of Siegel and served as an elder there. I have just, while we've been on, I have just gone on my other computer and looked up Siegel Avenue Church, and it's now called The Avenue. And I haven't now read up on exactly where The Avenue is as far as their growth. If they still, I would assume they're still multiracial, but I don't, I just got to it, so I haven't had a chance to really, but it was a very successful venture that Myers Park Pres folks and the original Siegel Avenue membership combined. So that's all I know about that right now.
My understanding is that Selwyn Avenue is also very focused there, and the pastor there's Lori Rabel. She was on the recent Union Seminary Social Justice Zoom webinar that on, I forgot the title of it, but it was out a week or two ago. And so she would be a good resource as well.
Thank you, Robert. I'm gonna interrupt. Hey, Robert, I sent you the text. Could you look at it, please? I have one last quote I want to read to you from Wallace. We've got about 10 minutes left. We are living out lies. The lie of race. Race isn't even real. It's a social construct we created to justify slavery. It isn't real, it's a myth. So we are living out this lie and we are stuck in it. We aren't free, it's a lie. It's not just people who are oppressed racially that are not free. It's just a part of that system who are white and don't even see what's going on. We aren't free either. How do you respond to that? And he goes on to say, how are you imprisoned by white supremacy?
This is Julie. I would say one of the things that I feel imprisoned by is almost feeling powerless as an individual. I mean, it's nice to talk about this and to talk about, and certainly views have changed, society has changed, but I'm complicit. So what I get imprisoned by is, so what can I as an individual do? And I think that's false, because I think individuals can do significantly more than we have done.
Thank you. Others?
John, this is Gordon.
Hey, Gordon.
I think, quite simply, we're imprisoned by our white privilege, our comfort levels, the conveniences we live with. We can walk away from these things and go home and enjoy all the advantages that a lot of the people we're trying to reach don't have. And I think one of the important things, especially speaking with you present, has to do with our development of faith formation curriculum in our church. Mary Kim alluded to this earlier, and I think it's one of the things we need to really focus on, is developing attitudes from scripturally based, instead of spending a lot of time telling our kids most of the Old Testament stories, which are a little bit more thrilling than some of the New Testament stories. Some of the scripture that Jim Wallace referred to today, I think can be transformed into a curriculum that would be great for all levels of faith formation. And I think that, I don't know if someone in the church or elsewhere has begun to develop these kind of things to achieve a level of understanding at the beginning levels of our kids. I love that story he told, as I think Mary referred to, of the kids in the 5th grade room in Washington, D.C. Wouldn't it be, and I also think about this one line from a South Pacific song: we must be carefully taught. And I think that begins at home. It begins, and we have a great responsibility in the church to begin that teaching in some way that opens up the whole concept of beloved community and equality for everyone. And I'll shut up.
Thank you, Gordon.
John.
You never have to shut up.
Sure. He talked, Wallace talked about the idol of whiteness. And I think one of the things we can do is to attack that idol of whiteness, which one of those idols that has been encapsulated in our society is a slogan: "Make America Great Again." In our Jubilee class, we studied this poem by Langston Hughes. He was the poet laureate of Black America in the 20th century. And he talked about how he had never been a part of this society, which was supposedly so great in the past, that he had always been shut out of that society. And at the close of the poem, his last words were not "Make America Great Again," which we have today, but his last words were "Make America Again." And I think that's what we're talking about here, is making America again.
Hey, John. John, it's Tom Clayton. Are you there?
Go ahead, Tom. John stepped away for a second.
Oh, okay. I think that to a great degree, we are imprisoned by our white history individually, in that many of us, probably the great majority of us, grew up in a white society. I also think that we here in Davidson are imprisoned by the history of Davidson. It is a town built around a white college where Black people in the community were here to serve the white people in the community. And somehow we individually have to overcome this white history, and we as a community have to overcome the white history. The way we can do it individually is to educate ourselves. The way we can do it as a community is, I am not sure.
We've got about 3 minutes left. Closing thought?
John, before we go, it's Susan Horning again. I just want to say how much I liked seeing the new sign at the church and hearing about the new banners and the letter to the ministers. I thought that was wonderful. Just wanted to put that in.
Thank you. For those of you who don't know what Susan's talking about, session this past week voted to, had already voted to send letters to the African-American churches in town, and also to hang banners on the church property and change the out front of the corner, and the banners will say, "Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Black Lives Matter. Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Black Lives Matter." And lastly, the sign on the corner says, "Love thy neighbor. Black Lives Matter." And that was with a motion from the Social Justice Committee.
I tend to be an optimist. This is Dennis. But I was really struck by Pidge's point about the youngsters and the grandchildren. All, and I think we really have room for optimism. It may take a long time, but you talk with your grandkids, they have no conception of what, separation of the races. I happen to grow up in a town where about 15% of the school was consisted of African Americans, about 5 to 10% of Jewish, and we were just all, just good friends. Unfortunately, because of income differences, there was pretty much segregation in housing. It certainly wasn't in school, but I think our grandchildren are in a place and showing that they really care about this issue, which makes me very optimistic.
Thank you, Dennis. I have one last quote from Jim Wallace that I want to leave you with, and I've asked Robert to close us in prayer. But before I read the quote, our video presenter, if anybody's interested, next week is Joel Edward Goza, and his book is America's Unholy Ghost. And it is, he talks about the DNA of the ideologies that shape our nation, so on. So if anybody's interested, that's the book. It's on the reading list. I'm also going to send you Union Presbyterian Seminary is doing another webinar this week that looks to be good as cities and towns are taking down statues. They are going to be examining that. So I'll send that out this afternoon. So here's the statement that Wallace leaves us with. My hope is when people put their faith into action, it makes you no longer sociologically predictable, that somehow you are spiritually transformed. It changes your behavior, your mindset, your way of thinking, your relationships. It changes how you are a citizen, how you participate in society. Robert?
Thank you all for being a part of this series and a part of the discussion today. Let's have prayer together as we close this morning. God of grace, on this Father's Day, we give thanks for your deep love for us and for the love that those who have been like fathers to us have poured into us. May we honor you and your image in us as we live out our faith today and every day, extending grace and welcome and love to every neighbor that we meet. Give us courage to step out of our comfort. Give us compassion to care for one another. Give us humility to look beyond ourselves and to consider the needs of others first. We give thanks for the young people in our midst who perhaps are leading the way and opening our eyes to what our world can be like. Help us to live out our faith with conviction and intention, and above all else, love. That we would truly be transformed by the renewing of our minds and discern what your good and perfect will for us and for all your creation is. We give thanks for your blessing, for our community, and for these moments where we can be open and honest and real with each other. Continue to guide us as we seek to be your faithful people. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Hope everybody has a great day. Maybe we'll see you on the screen in worship. Peace be with you.
Happy Father's Day, fathers.
Happy Father's Day.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
John. Thank you, Robert.